Ever get that feeling? Like you're working towards something big, a goal you've got set in your sights, but it feels like you're barely making a dent.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Putting in the effort but not really seeing the needle move, it can be super frustrating.
It is. It's like, where's the payoff for all this work? But what if, and stick with me here, what if the secret to those big wins is actually in the tiny things?
Interesting. You're talking about those small, almost invisible changes that over time add up to something huge.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, the power of small habits. We're going deep on James Clear's Atomic Habits, a book that really flips the script on how we think about change.
Love that book. It's all about how those little everyday actions, the things we often dismiss as insignificant, can actually be the building blocks of some pretty incredible transformations.
And that's our mission today, to break down those fundamental principles of how habits work, how they form, how we can change them, and really get to the practical stuff, the insights you can actually use. Because even though those little habits might seem, well, little, they can have a massive impact in the long run.
Absolutely. It's like, the whole atom analogy. One tiny atom on its own, not much to look at, right? But put a bunch of them together and boom, you've got something powerful.
Okay, I'm with you on the atom thing. So let's talk about the central idea here, the power of those small incremental improvements. What makes those so important?
Well, think about it this way. We often get caught up in the need for these big sweeping changes, these dramatic overhauls.
Yeah.
But real lasting change often comes from consistently making those small, almost imperceptible tweaks.
And I guess it's less overwhelming that way too, right? Starting small feels more manageable.
For sure. It's less about those massive leaps and more about that steady, consistent progress, kind of like compound interest, right?
Ah, the financial metaphor. Makes sense though. Small deposits over time lead to big gains. So you're saying that even a tiny improvement each day can really add up.
Precisely. It's that compounding effect that's so powerful. The book even gives a specific example. Just a 1% improvement each day might seem like nothing in the moment, but get this, over a year, that compounds to something like a 37% improvement.
Whoa, okay, 37%. That's a pretty compelling argument for those small steps.
It is, isn't it? But here's the catch, and it's where a lot of people get tripped up. Those initial results, they might be so subtle that you barely notice them. It's easy to get discouraged, to think this isn't working and give up. But it's that long-term perspective, that understanding that those small gains are building momentum, that's key.
So patience is a big part of the equation here. You've got to trust the process, even when you're not seeing those huge leaps right away.
Exactly. It's about playing the long game, recognizing that consistency over time is what really drives those significant results.
Okay, I'm convinced. Small habits, big impact. Got it. But let's get a bit more into the mechanics of how these habits actually work. Clear talks about this thing called the habit loop. What's that all about?
The habit loop, right. That's essentially the framework, the underlying structure of how any habit, good or bad, actually takes shape in our brains. It's like a cycle, a feedback loop that keeps those behaviors going.
So we're talking neurology here, how our brains are wired to create these patterns.
Exactly. And understanding this loop is crucial, both for building those good habits and for figuring out how to break those pesky bad ones.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break down the habit loop for us. What are the steps?
All right, so the loop often starts with a cue. It's like a trigger, a signal to your brain that, hey, it's time to initiate a particular behavior. It's something in your environment or maybe even an internal feeling that sets the whole thing in motion.
So the cue is like that initial nudge, the thing that kicks off the whole habit sequence.
Exactly. And a big part of building good habits is about making those cues super obvious. Like if you want to make reading a regular habit, leaving a book you're excited about right on your bedside table, that acts as a visual cue every time you walk past. It's like a little reminder.
So cue, got it. What's the next step in the loop?
All right, so after the cue comes the craving. This is where the motivation kicks in, the desire for the reward or the feeling that the habit is going to give you. It's that anticipation, that pull towards the change in state that the habit will bring.
Okay, so you see the book, that's your cue, and then the craving kicks in like, oh, I'd love to get lost in that story, or I'm really looking forward to learning something new from this book.
Precisely. And it's not always about pleasure either, right? Sometimes the craving is to relieve a negative feeling like boredom or stress. But either way, that craving is what fuels the next step.
Gotcha.
The response, the actual action you take, the habit itself. This could be anything, picking up the book and reading, going for a run, meditating, even just thinking a certain thought. Whatever the behavior is, that's the response.
So cue, craving, response. We're almost there, right? What's the final piece of this habit loop puzzle?
The reward. This is the payoff, the satisfaction, the benefit you get from performing the habit. It's what reinforces the entire loop, making it more likely you'll repeat the whole thing next time the cue pops up.
And I'm guessing this is where our good friend dopamine comes in, right? That little hit of pleasure that our brains just love.
You got it. Dopamine plays a big role in this reward phase. It's that feel-good neurotransmitter that gets released when we experience something pleasurable or rewarding, and it strengthens those neural connections, making the habit more automatic over time.
So it's a self-perpetuating cycle. The more we repeat the loop, the stronger those connections get, and the more ingrained the habit becomes, for better or for worse.
Exactly. That's why understanding this whole cue, craving, response, reward cycle is so powerful. It gives us a framework for working with our habits, for hacking the system, so to speak.
I like that, hacking the system. It makes it feel less like we're at the mercy of these automatic behaviors and more like we can actually influence them. Now, Clear also dives into how habits are connected to our sense of self, this idea of identity-based habits. What's that all about?
This is where things get really interesting. Clear suggests that there are actually 3 layers to changing our behavior.
3 layers. Okay, I'm listening.
So the first layer, the most surface level, is outcomes. These are the results we want to achieve, losing weight, learning a new skill, getting that promotion, whatever it might be. It's the what we're after.
Right, the goals, the things we're aiming for.
Yeah, exactly. But then there's the next layer down, processes. These are the habits and systems we put in place to actually get those outcomes. So, if your outcome is to lose weight, your process might be following a certain meal plan, working out regularly, stuff like that. It's the how we're going to get to the what.
Okay, so outcomes are the goals, processes are the steps we take to get there. Makes sense. But you said there were 3 layers, right? What's the deepest one?
This is where it gets really cool. The deepest layer, the foundation of it all, is identity. This is about our beliefs about who we are at our core.
So it's less about what we do and more about who we believe ourselves to be.
Exactly. And Clear argues that lasting change, real transformation, often requires shifting our identity, aligning it with the habits we want to build.
So instead of just aiming to lose weight, you start seeing yourself as a healthy person. Instead of just wanting to write a book, you start identifying as a writer.
Precisely. And here's the key. Every action we take, every choice we make, it's like casting a vote for the type of person we want to become.
Love that analogy. Every action is a vote. So if we consistently make choices that align with our desired identity, we're essentially solidifying that belief about ourselves.
Right. It's not any single action that instantly changes who we are. It's the accumulation of those consistent behaviors, those little votes, that shape our self-perception over time.
So how do we actually put this into practice? If we want to make lasting change, where do we start?
Well, Clear lays out a pretty straightforward 2-step process. First, you got to decide who you want to be. What are your values? What kind of person do you aspire to be? Get really clear on that.
So step 1, define your desired identity. What about step 2?
Step 2 is to prove it to yourself with small wins. Start taking those actions, building those atomic habits that align with that identity you've defined.
Each small win, each time you act in accordance with that desired self-image, it's like casting another vote, reinforcing that belief. I like it. So we've got the habit loop and this deeper level of identity, but how do we translate all of this into concrete action? Clear gives us those 4 laws of behavior change, right? Let's break those down and see how they can help us actually build better habits.
All right, let's do it. The 4 laws are really practical, actionable guidelines derived from that habit loop we talked about. They give us a framework for making good habits easier to adopt and bad habits easier to break.
Okay, so for building those good habits, what's the first law?
The first law is make it obvious. This one connects directly to that initial cue in the habit loop. The more obvious and noticeable the cue is, the more likely we are to initiate the behavior.
Makes sense. If the reminder is staring you in the face, you're less likely to forget or ignore it. So how do we make those cues obvious?
Well, there are a few strategies. One is called habit stacking. It's basically linking a new habit you want to build to an existing one that you already do consistently.
Oh, I like that. It's like piggybacking on an already established routine. So for example, after I brush my teeth, I'll do 10 squats, or after I make my morning coffee, I'll meditate for 5 minutes.
Exactly. It's all about using that existing habit as a reliable trigger for the new one. And then there's environmental design.
Environmental design?
Yeah, it's about intentionally arranging your surroundings to support the habits you want to cultivate. So if you're trying to read more, make sure there are books easily accessible in the spaces where you spend a lot of time. If you want to eat healthier, Keep those healthy snacks front and center in your fridge.
It's about setting yourself up for success, making the cues for your desired habits impossible to miss.
Exactly. And then there are implementation intentions.
Okay, what are those?
Implementation intentions are about getting really specific with your plans. It's not enough to just say, I want to exercise more. You need to decide exactly when, where, and how you're going to do it.
So instead of that vague exercise more goal, you'd say something like, I will go for a 20-minute run in the park near my house every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m.
Perfect example. That level of specificity makes it way more likely that you'll actually follow through.
Okay.
You've already made the decision beforehand, so there's less room for hesitation or negotiation with yourself in the moment.
I love that. It takes the guesswork out of it. So make it obvious. That's law number 1. What's the second law for building good habits?
The second law is make it attractive. This one taps into that craving stage of the habit loop. We're more likely to stick with habits that we find appealing, enjoyable, or rewarding in some way.
Makes sense. Our brains are wired to seek out pleasure and avoid pain, so we might as well use that to our advantage.
Exactly. One strategy Clear talks about is temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling, what's that?
It's basically pairing something you want to do but might not find super enjoyable on its own with something you love doing. So let's say you want to start exercising regularly, but you find it kind of boring.
I can relate to that.
Right, well, maybe you only allow yourself to watch your favorite TV show while you're on the treadmill or the stationary bike. Suddenly, exercise becomes way more appealing because it's associated with something you genuinely enjoy.
That's brilliant. You're tricking your brain into looking forward to the workout.
Exactly. And another strategy is creating a reward system. It doesn't have to be anything big or complicated. Maybe you put $1 in a jar every time you go for a run, and then at the end of the month, you use that money to buy yourself something you've been wanting. That little anticipation of the reward can be a powerful motivator.
I love that. It's like giving yourself those little mini celebrations along the way. So make it obvious, make it attractive. What's the third law?
The third law, make it easy. This one's all about reducing the friction associated with performing the habit. The easier and more effortless it is to do, the more likely you are to actually do it.
It's kind of like lowering the activation energy required to get started, right?
Exactly. And one of the best strategies for this is Clear's 2-minute rule.
The 2-minute rule, heard of it. Tell me more.
It's super simple. The idea is to scale down your desired habit into something that takes less than 2 minutes to do. So if you want to start meditating, don't aim for a 30-minute session right off the bat. Just start with 1 minute. If you want to write a book, just commit to writing 1 sentence a day.
It almost seems too easy. But the point is to just get started, to build that initial momentum.
Exactly. Once you've overcome that initial inertia, it's much easier to keep going. You've proven to yourself that you can do it, and that could be a huge psychological boost.
So don't overthink it. Just take that first tiny step, okay? Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy. We're on to the fourth and final law for building good habits. What is it?
The fourth law is make it satisfying. This one connects back to that reward phase of the habit loop. We're much more likely to repeat behaviors that give us a sense of pleasure or accomplishment that make us feel good.
And this is where habit trackers come in, right? Those little tools that help us visually track our progress.
Yes, habit trackers can be super effective. Whether it's a simple calendar where you mark off each day you complete your habit, or a fancy app, that visual representation of your consistency can be incredibly motivating. It's satisfying to see that chain of successes building up, and it can make you less likely to break the streak.
It's like a little reward in itself, seeing that visual proof of your progress. And Clear also talks about habit contracts, right? What are those all about?
Habit contracts are a great way to add a layer of accountability and make those consequences of slipping up a bit more tangible. You basically make a formal agreement with yourself, or maybe even with a friend or accountability partner, outlining the habit you're going to build, the consequences if you don't stick to it, and maybe even some rewards for success.
It's like putting some skin in the game, making those stakes a little higher. So, to recap, the 4 laws for building good habits are: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. Pretty actionable stuff, right?
Definitely. They give us a really practical framework for approaching habit change.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that really stood out to me in the book was how much our environment influences our habits. Clear really emphasizes the power of our surroundings. What's the core idea there?
It's a huge factor. Clear argues that our environment is often the invisible architect of our habits. It's full of cues that are constantly triggering our behaviors, both the good and the bad, often without us even consciously realizing it.
So our physical spaces, the people we surround ourselves with, even the digital environments we inhabit, they're all subtly shaping our actions.
Exactly. It's like our environment is this pre-programmed set of instructions for our behavior.
And that means we can actually use that to our advantage, right? If
Yeah.
we can intentionally design our environment to support the habits we want to build, we're setting ourselves up for success.
Precisely. It's about making those desired behaviors the default, the path of least resistance. So if you want to eat healthier, make sure your kitchen is stocked with healthy snacks and that those less healthy options are tucked away out of sight. If you're trying to focus more on work, declutter your workspace and minimize distractions.
It's like removing those tempting cues that lead to those unwanted behaviors and replacing them with cues that nudge you in the right direction.
Exactly. And the same goes for the people we surround ourselves with. The book talks about the power of joining cultures where your desired habit is the norm. So if you want to get into running, joining a running group can provide that social support and make those regular runs feel more natural and enjoyable.
It's about finding your tribe, those people who are already living the way you want to live, because those behaviors become contagious.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, if you're trying to break a bad habit, it can be super helpful to limit your exposure to environments or people that make that habit too easy to slip back into.
It's about recognizing those influences and making conscious choices about the environments we put ourselves in. Now, building these good habits, it's not always a linear process, is it? There are going to be ups and downs, setbacks along the way.
Totally. It's not about being perfect, it's about being consistent. Clear really emphasizes the importance of patience and focusing on those small wins along the way.
And this connects to the idea of focusing on the system rather than just the goal, right?
Absolutely. Clear argues that it's far more valuable to focus on building a solid system, a set of processes and routines that support your desired habits, than it is to just obsess over the end result. He says, and this is a great quote, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems."
That's so powerful. It's a reminder that it's the daily actions, the consistent effort that ultimately determines whether we achieve those big goals or not. And patience is key because those results might not be immediately obvious.
Right. It takes time for those small, consistent actions to compound and create significant change.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on building those positive habits, but let's talk about those bad habits, those pesky behaviors we're trying to kick to the curb. How does Clear suggest we approach breaking those?
Well, he emphasizes that the most effective strategy for breaking a bad habit is often to make it invisible.
Make it invisible.
Yeah, remember the habit loop. If you can remove or significantly reduce your exposure to the cues that trigger that bad habit, you're less likely to experience the craving and then engage in the response.
So out of sight, out of mind kind of thing.
Exactly. If you're trying to cut back on social media, delete the apps from your phone or at least turn off those notifications so you're not constantly bombarded with those tempting cues.
Makes sense. It's about taking control of your environment and minimizing those triggers. But what about those habits that are really deeply ingrained? The book mentioned how difficult it can be to completely eliminate those.
It's true. Bad habits can be super sticky because those neural pathways, those connections in our brains, have been strengthened over time. Relying fully on willpower to suppress them can be a real struggle.
So what's the alternative?
Well, Clear suggests a really clever approach. He calls it inverting the 4 laws of behavior change. Instead of making the bad habit obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, we do the opposite.
Flip the script on those bad boys. Okay, I'm into it. How does that work in practice?
All right, so to make the bad habit invisible, you reduce exposure to those cues that we talked about. To make it unattractive, you focus on the negative consequences of indulging in that habit. Remind yourself how it makes you feel physically or emotionally, or how it's hindering your progress towards your goals. To make it difficult, you increase the friction, make it more inconvenient to engage in the habit.
So if you're trying to watch less TV, you might unplug it and put the remote in another room.
Exactly. And finally, to make it unsatisfying, you introduce some immediate consequences for slipping up. Maybe you have an accountability buddy who you have to check in with, or you donate a certain amount of money to a cause you don't support every time you indulge in the bad habit.
Ouch. That last one would definitely make me think twice.
It's all about making those consequences more tangible and immediate. So we've got those 4 inverted laws for breaking bad habits. And the book also mentioned this cool strategy called habit stacking, not just for building good habits, but for replacing bad ones too.
Oh, right. Using habit stacking to disrupt that bad habit loop. How does that work?
It's about strategically inserting a new, desired behavior right after the cue of the bad habit. So let's say your bad habit is mindlessly scrolling through social media every time you pick up your phone.
Oh, I know that one all too well.
Right. Well, instead of trying to fight that urge completely, you could habit stack a new behavior onto it. So every time you pick up your phone, instead of automatically opening those social media apps, you could do a quick 5-minute meditation or listen to a podcast episode.
That's clever. You're not just trying to eliminate the bad habit, you're replacing it with something more positive.
Exactly. It's a more gentle and sustainable approach, and it helps to rewire those neural pathways over time.
This has been an awesome deep dive. We've covered a lot, from the power of those tiny atomic habits to the habit loop, identity-based habits, those 4 laws of behavior change, the influence of our environment, the importance of consistency and patience, and even some practical strategies for breaking those bad habits and replacing them with good ones.
It's been a great conversation. I hope everyone listening has gleaned some useful insights they can start applying in their own lives.
Absolutely. And remember, even though we've been talking about small habits, the impact they can have on your life is anything but small. Those tiny changes, when applied consistently, can lead to those big transformations you're after. It's not about overnight success. It's about building better systems, step by step, day by day.
That's the key takeaway. You don't have to make those radical changes all at once. Start small, be consistent, and trust the process.
So as you go about your day-to-day, think about just one tiny habit, something truly atomic that you can implement based on what we've discussed. What's one small action you can take starting right now that aligns with the person you want to become? And take a look around your environment. Are there any subtle cues that are either supporting or hindering your progress? There's so much more to explore in James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, so I highly recommend checking it out if you want to dive even deeper into these concepts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.